Formula One has unveiled the calendar for the 2024 season with a planned 24 Grand Prix now in store next year. It is by far the biggest calendar we have ever had in Formula One history, and especially when you take into account that this season we're going to have 22 Grand Prix, that is a pretty sizable increase. So first of all, let's take a look at the calendar itself, and at the end kind of talk about the implications for the fans, for the people working within Formula One, and is 24 races too much for Formula One? Here we are then, this is what we have in store in 2024. Now, kicking off the season, we have rounds 1 and 2, same as this year, Bahrain and then Saudi Arabia. However, a big change is that both of these races and both of the Grand Prix will now be on the Saturday instead of the Sunday. Now, this is because, especially for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, March the 10th marks the beginning of the month of Ramadan, so Formula One decided to move the race for Saudi Arabia on the Saturday, and because both of these races are back-to-back, for logistical reasons, it was just easier also to move the race for Bahrain also on the Saturday. So yeah, a little bit of a change there. Will be quite interesting actually to see what it's like and what it feels like to have a race on the Saturday. But yeah, not really massive changes, I suppose, at the end of the day, just a little bit there and there. However, then we get into some pretty big changes. Japan and Azerbaijan have now been kind of swapped in terms of which ends of the season they are at, because we then go to Australia, Japan, China, and Miami, each of them with a 1 week break in the middle. Now, this is kind of an interesting position in terms of where we are, because it does help logistically because a lot of the freight will be kind of on the right side of the world, but in terms of the personnel, it kind of gives the teams and the staff a bit of a conundrum in terms of, do you go back home for the week and then come back to Asia? And of course, let's not forget, most of the people that work in Formula One are European based. So do you race in Australia, then go back home, then go back to Japan, then go back home, and then go back to China again? You know, those continents, that's quite literally the other side of the world. Or do you stay perhaps a week longer and just stay out there and fly out a week later? So yeah, it'll give a bit of a headache to the people working within Formula One, but I think because Formula One are trying to help the sustainability of the calendar to kind of, in terms of the freight, which is the real big kind of, sustainability problem in Formula One of kind of shipping everything all over the world, it kind of, even though it's worse for the people, it's kind of better for that to keep it all on kind of the same side of the world. So yeah, that's going to be kind of a big changer next season. Also, to have Japan at the beginning of the year, that's going to be quite strange as well, but listen, I absolutely love Suzuka, so yeah, it's going to be, I can't wait for Suzuka this year, and also to have it at the beginning of next. Now, obviously, as you saw, China, that is going to be round 5. In terms of will that stay on the calendar, let's not forget that obviously we were supposed to have the Chinese Grand Prix this year, but that country obviously still is suffering quite a lot with COVID, very heavy restrictions. So will those have eased by next year? We're going to have to wait and see. I definitely felt for Huan Yu Zhou. Obviously, he didn't get to experience his home Grand Prix in his rookie season, and he didn't get to experience it, this season as well. So hopefully, if he is still in Formula One, which I do think he is, I think he's done a decent job. I don't really see why Alfa Romeo might look to drop him. Yeah, hopefully Zhou gets to experience his home Grand Prix in 2024. After Miami, we then go into kind of the traditional European leg of the season with a triple header of Spain, Austria, and then Silverstone. So yeah, that's going to be a busy period, kind of the traditional thing in Formula One. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of upgrades, especially during that part of the season, because close to the factory, just easier to get them out there as well. So yeah, that's going to be a very, very big one. And of course, that will also lead us to kind of the end of the first half of the season with Hungary and now Spa, just as we have this year as well, because kind of traditionally, Hungary has been kind of the final race of the first half of the season before we go into the summer break. But yeah, it's going to continue on from what's going to happen this year with Spa being kind of the final race. Now, obviously, something that is missing from the 2024 calendar, kind of to be expected, is Kyalami, potentially the South African Grand Prix. Now, I think obviously it's very frustrating that we're not going to get to see Kyalami or South Africa on the calendar for 2024, but I think we all see that, I think Belgium is going to be the one, potentially, if any of these are going to drop off the calendar, to potentially be replaced by Kyalami, hopefully for 2025. I do think that Spa is hanging on to its place on the F1 calendar by a thread, because not only do they only have a 1-year contract which expires in 2024, so at the moment there isn't a contract for Spa to be on the calendar from 2025 onwards, but also now with the crash that we saw with Delano passing away in Freca, there's even more pressure, not just on the track and the safety of the track, but what changes can be made to Eau Rouge? Is it fit for modern Formula One? All of that is going to come into, all of that is going to be taken into account when Formula One considers the future of Spa. I think that a lot of the fans want to see Formula One being brought back to Africa. We have a track that is suitable for Formula One racing. Unfortunately, the negotiations with Stefano Domenicali, Formula One, and the organizers in South Africa, they didn't, there wasn't unfortunately a deal to be had. We don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but that's unfortunate. A lot of the fans want to see, me, myself included, want to see a race in South Africa with Formula One getting bigger and bigger globally, with, every single continent wanting races. It feels wrong that we're not racing in Africa, where there's I'm sure a huge amount of passion for motorsport, and it feels like, in terms of even from the social side, that's something that we should be tapping into, those fans out there, and giving them the opportunity as well. So, Formula One are going to make a hell of a lot of money with this calendar. I mean, there's 24 races on it, so yeah, it feels like, something that is missing is a race in Africa, and something for 2025 is for Formula One to get the deal done to have a South African Grand Prix. And then, of course, we come back for the second half of the season and the last of the European races with Zandvoort and Monza, followed up by Azerbaijan, which will now be, of course, at the end of the season, and also Singapore. Now, what will be quite interesting there is that will kind of wrap up the majority of the season before we head into, the American races, and then also finishing off the season in the Middle East as well. But there's going to be a month-long break between Singapore and Austin. So yeah, that's going to give, I think, a lot of people, sometimes a pause and some time to relax. But yeah, that's going to be a big break. I mean, we finish in Singapore on the 22nd of September, and then the race in Austin is on the 20th of October. So yeah, a month-long break in the middle, or kind of towards the last half of the season, and then we kind of head back to the traditional kind of American races. We have a triple header of Austin, Mexico, and Brazil, and then another Saturday race in Las Vegas as well. Of course, that race will be the first one in 2023, with the inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix is what we have coming up. So will be interesting to see what changes might need to be made, or what the reception is going to be to Formula One in 2024, kind of a year on. And then we have kind of also the traditional kind of end to the season, Qatar also returning, of course, this year. So it's kind of strange looking at this calendar for next year, knowing that a lot of these tracks are going to be returning ones, with Qatar and also Abu Dhabi to finish off the season, a 24 race season. And also, when you kind of look at the beginning and the end, I mean, we kick off in Bahrain on the 2nd of March, and then the final race is on December the 8th. So that is a pretty packed calendar for 2024. Again, 24 races. I have to keep repeating myself because that is pretty mad. But yeah, that's going to be a pretty hectic 2024 season. And now, I did also want to quickly talk about the whole 24 races in 1 year, because Formula One, as we know, is just getting bigger and bigger. It's only due to different circumstances why we didn't have more races this year, obviously with China and then Imola, obviously both for different reasons, not going ahead. But yeah, 24 races in 1 year, with the fact that Formula One has so much more interest. And what that means, of course, is that more and more countries, I mean, also have an interest in hosting a Grand Prix and paying top dollar to Formula One and to the rights holders to even host a Grand Prix. And even when you look at somewhere like Las Vegas, for example, Formula One themselves have actually bought land in Las Vegas to kind of host that Grand Prix, and obviously that has a nominal value, so even if the Grand Prix doesn't work out or whatever, they can always just sell it on from Shure. They're not going to lose money on it, but that's a crazy investment to make in a Grand Prix. So it just shows you how much money Formula One is not just getting back, but also investing into these kind of big market, big commercial races like Las Vegas. So that's where it kind of gets a little bit odd in terms of there's more and more interest. But is that good for Formula One in the long term? Because 24 races in 1 year, that's massively taxing on the drivers, both mentally and physically. Keep in mind, I mean, we might see these guys on track for only Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but they've got, media commitments. I mean, for example, just yesterday I was at Piccadilly in London, and Alex Albon was at the Williams pop-up store, and that was on the Wednesday. I'm recording this on the Thursday, so these drivers, even building up to the race weekend, have massive commitments all weekend, so it's massively taxing on them, again, both physically and mentally. And then also the teams themselves and the personnel within the teams, all of the engineers, they work very, very hard. I mean, their job is massively kind of labor intensive. I think we almost take that for granted, and all of that traveling for them, I'm sure that's massively going to affect, their lives, their social lives. And so I think Formula One will have to take that into account. I'm looking forward to seeing what the feedback is from the actual people that have to experience this calendar for themselves, the teams, the drivers, the journalists, what they think of this calendar, because I do think that we're going to get to a point where there's got to be rotating staff, surely, across all of the teams, because with that many races, under the budget cap, potentially there might have to be allowances for, for more personnel if that's possible. I know that their salaries aren't capped necessarily, but potentially just expanding the teams under the budget cap to allow more people, because if Formula One is making more money throughout, with this massive calendar, that means the teams are also going to make more money. And so I think some budget cap changes might also need to be introduced as well. I think we all understand, even on a human level, the challenge of all of this traveling. I mean, I have been lucky enough, this month I've been to Austria. I'm going to Silverstone this weekend. Also, if you're going, let me know and say hi. And I'm also going to be lucky enough to go to Hungary as well. And even, that's a massive privilege, but even for me, who's not really used to traveling, even going to Austria, that was very tiring. And again, I could not imagine what it's like for the people to even be, working when they get there for 24 races in a calendar. So I can almost, I can understand with my very limited experience of some of the frustrations that I'm sure they're going to go through. And now another point of view that I wanted to talk about is perhaps a bit of a unique one for me personally, and perhaps maybe it's not one that 99.9% of my audience can really share with, but as a content creator. Now, this is something that I've talked about a lot with, other fellow YouTubers that cover Formula One. The strange thing is, I mean, this is my job, and it's amazing to be able to say that, that I can, earn a living off YouTube and also just have this amazing life where I can go to races sometimes. I'm massively lucky to do this, but it's weird because I'm kind of also conflicted when I see this calendar, because on one side, 24 races is just too much in my opinion. I don't think it helps the quality of the season and the quality of the racing. But on the other side, in terms of making videos, the more races there are, the more content I can make, and ultimately the better a living I can have, because that's just kind of how it works. There's more engagement, there's more interest in Formula One throughout the entire course of the year, because as a lot of content creators that I have spoken to found out this year, in April, where we basically didn't have any races. I mean, I know that we kind of had one race right at the beginning and one race right at the end, but for the most part, April basically had no racing, or it felt like it, and that was a really bad month in terms of content. I have spoken to so many creators, even gaming creators who you might not think would experience the same thing, and they had the exact same problem as me in terms of there wasn't anything much kind of exciting to talk about, there wasn't really great videos to make, and it really has a big impact on our business. So yeah, it's kind of a strange feeling in terms of, I wanted to give kind of that perspective as well, because I as someone who makes F1 content, I've got to take it into account. On one side, a 24 race calendar just doesn't feel right, and on the other, it is good for content. You guys, it does seem like even though the season is long, people are still engaged all the way until the end of the year. And when you consider that we're going to be finishing the season in 2024 in December, it's, on one side it's quite good for the channel, and on the other it's going to be very, very taxing as well. So there's definitely a balance to be stricken, and I'm not quite sure if this calendar really gets it. I do think that it's going in the right direction in terms of the sustainability. It's so difficult to put these calendars together because different tracks are going to have different requirements, even contractual requirements. You've got to take the weather into account. So for example, some parts of the world are we just can't race there in certain parts of the year, because perhaps due to the weather, or due to maybe the temperature or the amount of rain that might happen. All of that has an effect on the calendar. So as much as it is very difficult to put this together, I do think perhaps with grouping a little bit some of the Australia and some of the Asian races together, they have tried to kind of lower the cost of the freight and the flight, which obviously helps with sustainability, because there's less kind of air time for the planes. So yeah, it's a difficult business putting these calendars together, there's no doubt about it. But the last kind of thing that I wanted to ask is your opinion. I mean, as fans, how do you feel about this calendar? Do you feel like at the moment, if we it's weird because this season, because it's been, let's be honest, not a great season with Max and Red Bull completely dominating the championship, would we feel the same if we had a titanic title battle like in 2021, and if we had just more and more races and more of that throughout the season? How much do you think it impacts your perception of how many races you won and what is a good and bad calendar size on how good the current season is? I think all of that has a massive effect on how we perceive a good or a bad season, how we perceive more or less races. And also, what do you think is the sweet spot in terms of how many races we should have? Because I'm sure this is something that's going to, keep being a massive topic within Formula One, and rightly so, because when there's races like Kyalami, which we'd love to see on the calendar and that haven't quite made it, when there's races that look a little bit shaky and perhaps, will they have a long-term future on the calendar or not? All of these questions are going to keep being asked in the following years. So let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below. I can't wait to see what all of you have to say about the 2024 calendar with 24 Grand Prix or anything that I've talked about in this video. And if you did enjoy this one, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.